Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host,
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content, and before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, we're back at it again. It is now October, and finally, it's over. Our national nightmare, Jonathan Kuminga. Where will he go? What will he do? It's over. He now has officially signed a 2-year, $48 million contract to stay with the Golden State Warriors, the second year being a team option. And, this is a big deal, right? Because we were trying to figure out where he was going to go, whether or not he would leave. I know when the offseason started, my expectation was that he would probably just re-sign with them and then they figure out what to do. And then there was talk about maybe he takes the qualifying offer, but it's a win-win. It's more so a win for Golden State because, as I said, they needed him to not take the qualifying offer, anything but the qualifying offer, because they needed him to sign some type of deal where they have the option to be able to trade him for whatever they want to trade him for if necessary. As I said, if he took the qualifying offer, I would have said the window is shut. I still think it's closed because I think they're going to be good, but they aren't. But, there are other teams in the West that I think have a better chance. But at the very least, you were able to get him. So now all your other offseason moves are complete, right? They brought in Horford. They brought in DeAnthony Melton. They brought back Gary Payton II. They're bringing in Seth Curry later in the season because they're almost right at that second apron. So they have to, I think, sign him to an Exhibit 9 or waive him, then give him an Exhibit 9 or whatever it is, and then bring him back like in November when they can sign him for the prorated amount. I believe they also signed Will Richard, which was their draft pick. So I guess, now that you step back, take a step back, we laughed, we clowned, but when you look at the roster, it's not that bad. It's pretty good, right? They had a good offseason, at least in terms of the players that they brought in. Just the problem is the age, they are older. And we know by and large that it is very difficult for older teams to be able to get through the 82-game regular season grind plus the playoffs. They're very smart, high IQ players. They're running back a team that got to the second round, maybe gets to the conference finals if Steph doesn't get hurt. And then they added guys onto the team, right? You added Horford, right? Two-way stretch big, can still defend, can still play on both ends of the floor, pass, be physical, add more size. Now you can have a floor spacing big next to Draymond and Jimmy Butler to balance out the jump shooting that they don't give you on a consistent basis. And now you don't have to rely as much on Quentin Post and Trace Jackson Davis over the course of the season because Kevon Looney's gone, right? Melton, if he's healthy, right, that's a two-way 3-and-D guy. We got to wait a while before he comes back because I believe he's going to be out at least a month because he's still recovering from the torn ACL that he had last year. And then, I guess when you look at the rest of the guys, right, like Peyton, he's a year older. He's kind of an injury-prone guy. Can't really rely on him as much from a regular season standpoint. But the main thing is that what happens with Kuminga, right? What is his role on this team? Does he buy in as long as he's here with the expectation that at some point he's going to get dealt, right? What happens if they don't win games right away? Because everything works fine when you win. But when you lose games, maybe it might be a little bit more difficult, for that role to continue. But the thing that's going to be tough is you look at his salary and it's $22.5 million. I kind of challenge people to come up with a trade for Kuminga, right? That makes sense that you could actually see happening because there's a lot of deals where it might be a little bit tough to get one done. Of course, you can always have 3 teams, but he's at $22.5 million this season. And basically, if you're looking at the Kuminga type of packages, right? It's either do you trade him and maybe split up his contract and bring in some role players? Do you kind of put him in a larger package for a star, which means presumably you're giving up picks? Or, is it kind of just like take on bad money, right? Where you're just kind of taking on like just random players or whatever, right? So that's the tough part where I don't really have. I know there's been mentions of targets. Like I know Brett Siegel of Clutch Points has mentioned, what is it, like Trey Murphy or Bam Adebayo, I think has now come up, or Giannis, right? That's their dream. Of course, Jokic is also a dream as well, right? We knew LeBron at one point was a dream. Don't know if he still is, but I mean, the main thing is can you turn him into a guy that makes a lot more sense for this team, regardless of whether or not it's like a role player or a star? I don't know. I mean, I think that would be the goal, right? Like Mike Dunleavy Jr. seems like he's done so far like a decent job in terms of finding talent, right? Like he's been able to draft relatively well. He pulled off the Butler deal. He got these guys to agree to come to the team earlier in the summer, right? And they just waited and waited and waited and they never reneged on their offers. So I don't know. It's a matter of whether or not you think that this team has what it takes to be able to win the championship. I would say no, because I think the age is a factor. And I just think, OKC and Denver, better teams with better chances of winning, a little bit more balance in terms of the roster. But I think it's a good team. Like, I'd be a little bit higher on them than maybe some other people. I know you're not quite as high on them, but you still got to give them a chance with stuff on the roster. And there's always the possibility that at the deadline they turn Kuminga into something. What it is, I don't know. Could it be Trey Murphy? I don't think so. But could you turn it into just players that make sense? I think ideally you'd like to kind of swap him out for some other wing that makes sense, right? Because I mean, people have mentioned, say, like, the Kings offered Malik Monk, right? But the only issue with that is that you're bringing in another guard on a team that already has a bunch of guards. Right now, he'd be better than most of the other guards on the team other than Steph, at least offensively, but you still have to have that issue, right? And then they're also getting up right. They're also a first apron team, so they can't take back more salary than they send out. So then that kind of makes some of the deals a little bit tricky. But like I said, that just means you're probably going to have maybe 3 teams or more. So, like I said, if you take a step back and look at the roster, like like we laughed at it because of how long it took, but like I think they will be good. It's just a matter of being able to preserve and manage these guys' workloads through the regular season. Can you get Steph, Jimmy, Draymond, Horford to play 60 games together in the regular season at least? Because if you can do that, that should be a top 6 seed. If they can get into the playoffs relatively healthy, like they have a chance at beating a lot of these teams. And with the Van Vliet injury, that kind of opens the door maybe for a tier 3 team to maybe get in. I think like your best hope is that, like last year, OKC and Denver are on the same side of the bracket. They play each other in the second round, and then you get to the conference finals, maybe not having to play either of them until you get to the conference finals, right? But if they're on the opposite ends of the bracket and then you have to play one or the other or both, right? That's probably not what you want to do. But that's why that's why you kind of put these type of teams together and then make a move at the deadline and then get hot and then anything can happen, right? We've seen teams make moves at the deadline to improve themselves. That's what the Warriors did last year. So, best case scenario of mostly bad scenarios, it's just a matter of how much can we actually trust Kuminga to really buy in while he's on the team. Because ideally, as the regular season's going on, you're going to need him for some of these games, right? I know it's just preseason and practice, but I believe I had read that Butler had tweaked his ankle in one of their practices, right? So, and that's one of the concerns, one of the issues with having, an older team. And that's a guy that's not really known for playing 70 plus games, right? There's going to be games where those guys might be out and you need a guy like Kuminga to give you extra pop. But it seems like Steve Kerr, right? He mentioned in one of his interview quotes, where he said, Steph, Jimmy, Draymond, those are the alphas. Of course, Kerr is a leader as a coach, right? So those are the main guys that matter, right? So a guy like Kuminga, if he's not bringing it, he's not going to play. Like this could be like one of those, this could be like maybe the Westbrook situation in the 22-23 season, right? Where like he plays early on, it doesn't work. They send him to the bench and it seems like it works. And then remember they had that game where I think it was LeBron breaking the scoring record and it seemed like that situation just blew up and then eventually they traded him. So could it be like that? Hopefully not. Like you hope that the team is good, but that is a concern, right? Because like I said, the Lakers in 2022, right? The first year with Russ, they also were a team that was clowned for being old, and people were right. The difference was that I think they had a lot more guys on that roster that were just done, right? Like remember guys like Trevor Ariza or Rondo or DeAndre Jordan or a bunch of other guys on the roster, right? Like they were just done as rotational players that you had to rely on. I don't think this team has those type of players. But you always have to question the fact that Al Horford is 39 years old and he is at the point in his career where you just never know, where a guy could just have a year where he just kind of falls off a cliff. But his game isn't really one that's predicated on being a crazy athlete or, running and jumping around. It's based on being super smart and super skilled as a big man. So, assuming he moves into that starting center spot, which I believe he will, like I said, this is a good team. You added more 3-point shooting to a team that didn't have a lot of that last year to balance everything out. So I think they're good, and I think they'll be able to continue from where they left off last season, 24-7 with Butler. I don't expect that to translate to 82 games, but I do expect that they should be in a better position than last year, because as long as they're relatively healthy, they shouldn't have a long stretch like last year where they just stunk it up because they don't have enough talent.
Yeah, I think the pairing of Steph and Jimmy is awesome. I think it's actually one of the more underrated and not really talked about duos for sure, especially in today's time with all the new pairings that we have now. But I think the problem is they don't have the firepower to kind of replicate, I think, what made them so special, during the 2022 title run and whatnot, right? Like Kuminga, in theory, should be, that guy who's uber athletic, and that also translates to defense, and he should have a serviceable 3-point shot, but the problem is he doesn't, right? And that's where you're missing that Andrew Wiggins type of guy. You don't have a Klay Thompson on this team. You have arguably better, obviously, in Jimmy Butler, which I think is a fair trade-off, but then you don't have that guy off the bench in a Jordan Poole that can kind of just give you 20 a night and be that spark plug. So they are missing things in that department, and I think the wing spot is the part that scares me about this team because it's not super deep. You already talked about it. There's tons of guards. They all do very different things, right? You have D'Anthony Melton. He can do a lot. Moses Moody can do a lot. Pajemski can do, some things as well. Gary Payton Jr., right? Like the list goes on. And then you add in Seth Curry as well. I mean, like it's a solid rotation, and I have no worries, about this team for the regular season. I just think the postseason is where you're probably going to see them have some woes, and especially, like you said, with the age, the construction of the team. Like, it's not horrible, but does it have championship written on it? Not in my opinion. I think Al Horford, bringing him in, is definitely a good step in the right direction because you have a legit big, right? Like, not, somebody who you're kind of just, hoping and praying can get you through certain series and stuff like that, right? You're not forcing Draymond to play the 5. Him at the 4 should be very interesting. How does that look, with Kuminga in the mix? Who knows? But I don't have too many expectations for this roster. I don't think title is in the cards at all. I could see them getting out of the first round, maybe the second, depending on who the heck they play, but first round is probably what it's looking like for me, like a first round exit. But now I guess, since Kuminga is officially on the team and all the moves that they made are pretty much, complete, I guess we could low-key just revisit our offseason grades because, I mean, yeah, like now they are complete. I would probably bump it up to maybe like a C, just because I think, the whole Kuminga thing definitely derailed them in that department, but they made, the best of a awkward, weird situation, and, they did some good things for the depth because it is better than last year. I'll give them that. The depth pieces are definitely better. You can see that they're trying to form an identity. It's just, I think at that wing spot is what scares me because I don't like the fact that Kuminga's not really a floor spacer.
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably move it up to a B. I think I had it. I think you had it as an F.
Absolutely.
I think I had it.
You're dang right.
So we're both basically moving it up 2 spots because, like you said, and like I said, they added extra depth pieces to a team that was a good team last year, a really good team, one of the better teams in the league post Jimmy Butler trade. It's just the combination of the age of the players, which is, I know, an annoying thing to bring up, I'm sure, if you're a Warriors fan, but it is a real thing, right? Like, there's a reason why, the last several teams that have won the championship were teams led by younger-ish stars or guys like kind of entering their prime, because those are the guys that can, for the most part, hold up over the course of an 82-game season and postseason. Now, unfortunately, we've seen some of those guys go down with bad injuries, right? Like Tatum with the Achilles, although some people think he might be back this season. Halliburton's going to be out for sure all of this season. So even now, like, yeah, even some of these young guys can't necessarily do it. I mean, we saw OKC in the finals in Game 4, which they ended up winning. Right, they looked gassed in that game, right? Where like Indiana's picking them up full court. So imagine that with an older team. But I think just overall, you look at the team's mindset, right? In a lot of the interviews, just going into the season, they just look much more energized and much more optimistic about their chances prior to the last season, right? Because last season, I remember, because we talked about it, where I think Steph's quote was, "Our hope is that we can be a relevant team, and then at the deadline, maybe look to improve." But now they're talking championship, right? And that's what you want to hear, from a team that's got Steph Curry on it, just because he is one of those proven winners. But I just think it is okay if they make it, like, if they don't win the championship, like, I don't look at it as a failure at this point, because now I don't have expectations for them to win the championship. It's a little bit different than, say, some of the other teams, right? Where it's like, if OKC doesn't win, you call that a failure of the season, even though they won it last year, right? If Denver or some of these other teams don't win it, it's a failure. I mean, a lot of these teams are in a championship mindset. It's just the expectations aren't necessarily the same. But for Golden State, they've been able to thrive when the expectations are gone, right? Because in 2022, right, most people didn't go into that season picking them to win the championship, and they were very good that year, and ended up winning the championship, right? So we've seen them when there's a ton of pressure and they've been able to win, and when there's no pressure, they've been able to win.
Yeah.
So there's reasons to believe, and I think if you're a Warriors fan, you should feel good about this roster, especially compared to the beginning of last year, right? When we're talking about, is it Lindy Waters? Is it Buddy Hield? Which guy is starting? Is Kuminga going to take that leap, right? Are they going to run, a team with like Wiggins at the 2 and then Kuminga at the 3 and all this other stuff? But now it's like you got a real co-star in Jimmy Butler, right, who can play his role to a T, fits very well there. We've talked about that, talked about it from the moment he got traded there. And now you've got better surrounding pieces to round everything out, right? So this should be a really good team on both ends of the floor. Just a matter of, like I said, I'm curious to see what it looks like at the deadline, because I think, it would be nice, honestly, if you could just get a really good version of Kuminga and just get him to a point where he can play starter minutes and be a real impact guy on both ends of the floor. Because, it would be nice to have a guy who's a great athlete and can use his physical tools on both ends of the floor, attack the basket, play downhill, play defense, crash the boards, get to the free throw line. But he just doesn't do that with any level of consistency.
Nope.
And on the defensive end, that's the part where you really would like him to lock in, because on this team, he's not going to be one of the featured offensive players, just because you already have a system in place that's been successful, and you're not going to change it to make it work for Kuminga, right? He has to find a way to fit into that. So if it works out and you get the best case scenario version of him, great. But are there any guys that you kind of have your eye on if you're Golden State where you would like to replace him with? I know we've talked about the dream targets, but like I said, I went into the trade machine. It was very difficult to find like an obvious choice. I mean, maybe you could revisit some of the trades that they mentioned in the offseason, but I would think if they would have just done it now if they liked those. So they're probably holding out to see if there's maybe a better deal, because it feels like now that's usually what happens, where the better deals come later at the deadline.
Yeah, I think we'll probably see a market materialize for him, like you said, at the deadline. There's just probably nothing there. There practically wasn't anything in the offseason that was, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there wasn't really a market, and that's how we even got into this situation in the first place. But I mean, off the top of my head, money wise, I don't know if it would work, but I would just bring back Wiggins, find a way to bring him back. I think that would be more serviceable than this, in my opinion. I think Kuminga's not willing to do the little things, like you said, and I think whereas Wiggins is willing, to be that lockdown defender while also space the floor and do other things while scoring as well. So, money wise probably doesn't work, but the dream targets, I mean, I guess we could revisit those. Trey Murphy, I'd love that for Golden State, but I would hate it for New Orleans. I don't know why on earth they would do that. I don't think they would agree to that. But maybe they would, because, depending on, what their general manager, thinks of the team. I don't know, because I think he's pulled off some questionable moves, this offseason. So who knows? Maybe you can fleece them on that. Bam, I don't know if Miami would bite on that, because, in all honesty, I think Miami is pretty close to contention. They're just missing one extra guy, one extra elite guy, and I don't think they would kind of be willing to, dip out
Give
on Bam. You know what I mean?
Jimmy and
Yeah,
Bam over.
right. Yeah, right. Like I don't think they would be too hype on that. So, and obviously, Giannis, I don't think that's in the cards at the moment. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe the Trey Murphy one, just because the name is out there, and like I said, questionable moves from New Orleans recently.
Yeah, that's the thing. If I'm New Orleans, I don't really understand why I would
No.
give up Murphy for Kuminga
No.
when I think most people feel like Murphy is the better player, or at the very least the easier player to fit into
Yeah.
a role. I know he's not necessarily like a lockdown defender either, but at least on the offensive end, like he's a really good shooter. He's still a good athlete. He's got a lot of length.
Yeah.
And last year for New Orleans, I know most people tuned out and kind of stopped watching them, understandably so, right? But he even improved as an on-ball guy, right?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
he actually, took steps in terms of being able to put the ball on the floor and make plays. So he has become a more complete offensive player. It's just, I guess, if New Orleans was just trying to sell off guys, but they don't have their first round pick. But, so you kind of wonder why they would even do that. But it's also like, as I mentioned in that last episode, sometimes you can't always apply logic to every front office decision, because sometimes you look at these decisions and you're just thinking, what are these guys thinking? Like, it just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what happens. But yeah, in the trade machine, yeah, like a Wiggins for Kuminga straight up doesn't work because of the first apron issues that you run into. So, like I said, that's where you're going to have a 3-team scenario, but that means either they have to send a second player out somewhere else, or, something else is going to have to be done. Maybe one of those other teams moves a third guy, but like I said, they can't take back more salary than they send out. So that's where it becomes a little bit tricky, but that's what happened with Butler, right? They were able to figure that out, and they had 5 or 6 teams that were involved in that trade. So it seems like it seems like they know what, they know what they're doing over there in terms of at least Mike Dunleavy Jr. So I'm sure he'll probably be active on the trade market. It's just a matter of, it would just be nice if you could just get the best version of Kuminga, but I just don't. You're not going to get that on this team. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a 2-year deal with a team option, right? They would have just given him the extension straight up and would have just been like, "We believe in you. Here's your role. If you're, and it's yours, and take it."
Yeah.
So, and that's not going to happen.
Right.
And that's probably the best at this point. It kind of sucks because it does mean that once the Steph era is over, it's going to be ugly. But I guess if you're able to win one more, it'd be worth it. It's just, are they actually going to win one more? I think that's kind of the tough call out there.
Yeah.
So, now that that's over, kind of moving on to other things around the NBA. We did get Quentin Grimes, right? He also took the qualifying offer. So now he did it himself. He took the 1-year qualifying offer with the Sixers, right? So probably that means that he won't be a Sixer after the season, which makes sense, right? Because they have depth at the guard spot. It's just, you kind of wonder, does he get traded? He has the no trade thing, I guess. So we'll see what happens with that. And it's tough because it feels like a lot of his best games were when Philly was terrible. So it's like, how much stock do you take into what he was doing with the ball in his hands? But we kind of did see him in decent environments where there's at the very least like a defined role that he could play as kind of like a 3-and-D guard. So, I mean, I would think it would be cool if a team could take a flyer on him, but with Philly, it's just, you don't know what to expect, right? I mean, we'll guess if we want, we can talk about, later their preseason stuff, but like, their other stars still aren't out on the court yet. So you still would like to have, the depth that you can have, but I mean, it's just tough, right? Because, I mean, I guess for the Sixers, like, yeah, you got out of the Cody Martin deal, which looks like a bad contract now for Quentin Grimes, but now you're not going to keep him. But the situation's changed because you did get VJ Edgecombe, where, he's looked pretty good. And as long as he continues to improve as an outside shooter, right, he's probably going to turn out better than Quentin Grimes. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I think Quentin Grimes, I mean, it is what it is, that he signed the qualifying offer, but it's a temporary situation, right? And I feel like it probably always was that, right? Last year was such a awkward year for Philly, right? We don't even need to revisit that, but yeah, it's just I don't think anybody wanted to give him that number, right? Because like they were indicating what around like 30 and then 20 and then it kind of dropped to 25 and they just never really matched a number. So I mean, it was kind of just like the last resort, I guess, and here we are. But I don't think it's horrible for both parties. Like I think it's probably better for Grimes because he gets to kind of bet on himself and showcase what he's got. And I think he's a great player. I'm just curious what his role is going to be on another team, right? Would it be a starter? Would it be a bench guy? Who knows? But it's kind of like an exhibition year for him, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Just because, it's basically a 1-year deal.
Yeah.
And after that, I think he'll be gone either way.
Yep.
So, what do we think of Philly? Because, I mean, I guess we might as well mention it, right? Like,
Sure.
preseason, always take it with a grain of salt. Still no Embiid, still no Paul George. We know that Jared McCain's going to be out for at least a little bit. But, I don't know. Like, are we already should we already just be out on Philly at this point?
Yeah, I'm kind of regretting some of the things that we said about them. But we did kind of give that caveat of, right, like we didn't and won't know necessarily what they look like by the end of the season health wise. But I mean, the stuff just keeps piling on, right? They don't have any of their superstars available. But I mean, outside of like, I guess you can consider Maxey a superstar, whatever you want. But I mean, he's available. But Embiid and Paul George are not going to be ready to go. And I think that's the part that's concerning for a lot of people because I mean, it's a continuous trend, and everybody seems to be okay with it, right? Like in terms of the organization. The players themselves, they seem to be okay with it and at peace, and I think that's kind of startling to me, where there's no sense of panic, right? Even though the building is on fire, everybody's just kind of sitting there meditating for some odd reason, right? And I think that's the thing that's kind of throwing me off about the whole situation. Granted, I think there are reasons to have faith and be kind of looking on the up and up because a lot of the young guys look good, right? Like you already talked about it, hinted at it. VJ Edgecombe, he looks solid, right? We've seen him, play some summer league and now some preseason, and he seems to be, a very willing defender, a willing playmaker, just an overall guy where you tell him to do something, he's most likely going to do it, right? I think it's just, how much of his game is going to be predicated on an outside shot, right? We already know that he can get to the rim. That was very evident, during his time in college. But to see him kind of be a good playmaker, a guy who can crash the boards and be that kind of Swiss Army knife that, Grimes was for them last year at times while also being a pretty high volume scorer. Yeah, I think the potential is through the roof with that guy. I think, his ability to recognize, kickouts when the defense is crashing, hit Oubre in the corner a few times, like that looks good. That's promising. But I need to see it with Embiid and Paul George, or else it doesn't really mean anything, right? So
Right. Yeah.
that's my concern is, yes, the other guys look very good, but the main guys, we don't know what they look like because they're not here. They're not available.
Right. Yeah, that's the main thing is that, and that's why I said you got to take preseason with a grain of salt,
Sure.
just because there's just so many different things that you have to take into account, right? Like, even like as we got on, right, like the Lakers Sun game was ending, but like say for the Lakers, like a bunch of their main guys are out, right? Like there's no Luka, there's no LeBron. There's so like that's all you're already down two of your best players, which are two guys that are pretty crucial, to the team. Phoenix had most of their guys available, right? But like how much stock do you take in that against like a weird version of the Lakers team, right? And then when you look at the Knicks, right, like they also played, as well, and they had their full group of guys for the most part. I believe OG Anunoby didn't play, but they did try out the two big lineup, right, in that in the starting group, right, where they had Mitchell Robinson and Towns playing together. And one of the things that we talked about with the Knicks was, could you see somewhat of a shift in what they're doing on the offensive end outside of just give Brunson the ball and get out of his way, right? Because we talked about for the Knicks, that's going to have to be what they're going to have to do on the offensive end if they want to be able to actually have a real chance at winning it all, right? You're going to have to diversify your offense and not put Brunson in a spot where he's going to have to overexert himself on the offensive end, because we know he's going to get targeted on the defensive
Mhm.
end. But as long as he keeps the offense humming, right, you can at least put up points on the other end of the floor. So, I mean, as I already said, right, you don't want to put too much stock into it, right? But it was nice to see them already start off with the two big lineup, and I am curious to see which one they roll with, right? And it could just be matchup dependent. But the fact that in the limited stretches that we saw it last year, it was really good and really impactful. Um, that's a good sign, right? Because we know that some of these teams are trending towards experimenting with more two big lineups, right? Not every team wants to play big, right? But we have seen, like I said, more teams experiment with that type of look. And the fact that the Knicks have it, and both guys are big 7-foot guys, and one of them is one of the best offensive rebounders in the league, right? And can also block shots and move his feet. Like that's good, right? And that's something that we talked about with the Knicks last year when they first got Towns, where we were kind of wondering, like, hey, are they going to just start, when Mitchell Robinson comes back, are they just going to start two big lineups out of the gate, right? He wasn't healthy to begin the season, and they need him to be healthy, which is always kind of a scary proposition. But I mean, we were already higher on the Knicks than Philly anyways,
Oh
so
yeah, yeah, big time.
that's
Like,
kind of an easy one.
yeah, yeah. I mean, like the Knicks. I I don't really know. Like, from what I've seen, certain things look good, especially in the practices and stuff like that. Right, the offense seems to be more ball movement based.
Right.
Which is a good thing, right? Because you have all these guys for a reason, right? All these guys can be, not necessarily offensive engines, but definitely, finishers in a play, right? Like, I wouldn't have a problem with Bridges, being the guy who takes the shot in a play, draw plays for these guys. So I think, Mike Brown will bring, a certain kind of energy that we haven't seen with this group. Granted, we've only seen them together for one full season. But year two of this group should be interesting because there's going to be some dynamic changes. I think that Mike Brown obviously has brought in.
Yeah. Thing with this group of guys, like you said, is the fact that you kind of want to see a little bit more ball movement, and just the fact that, like, hey, other guys can bring the ball up, other guys can make plays, because what's the point of having all these talented guys if you're not going to use them, on both ends of the floor? It is tough though, because we know at different points. I mean, in a basketball game and over the course of a season, teams and guys do kind of default back to some of the habits that they've developed over time, right? Where, like, you have five guys on the floor and everybody's eventually going to kind of play very specific roles. So that's something where there could be a scenario where guys kind of just go back to what they were doing before. But I think you just hope that there's a level of buy-in as they win games, and that's the main thing. Knicks continue, if they can continue to win games and pile up wins, and stay up front in the standings, right? As they're supposed to be, right? They're supposed to be one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference this season. So, I mean, just as a whole, I like the team. I mean, I mean, I don't know why it's so funny, but, like, just as a
I just
whole,
saw some on my phone. That's all.
but like, just as a whole, like, I like this team, the look of the team, and we were both high on the Knicks last year, right? I know you were slightly higher on them than I was because you picked them to win the championship, but I think there's reason to be optimistic about the Knicks this year, especially in this weird East, right? This is a weirdo Eastern Conference where we've mentioned all these teams where, like, yeah, there are teams outside of the Knicks and Cavs that you have to take seriously to be able to contend in the Eastern Conference, because every year, how often does everything go the exact way we think it will go, right?
Never.
Like, we have had a scenario where it's like, yeah, OKC is the best team in the league, they win the championship, right? Boston's the best team in the league, they win the championship. But, I mean, think about it, right? We kind of thought that OKC and Boston would meet up together. That wasn't the case. Boston went out in the second round to the Knicks after the Knicks could not beat them a single time in the regular season. In literally any of them. I mean, they couldn't beat any of the top teams at all, right? And then they get to the conference finals, right? And then Denver the year before goes out in 7 in Minnesota. So that's the tricky part. But just in this Eastern Conference, I think out of the box, I personally feel more confident in the Knicks than the Cavs. But I think the Cavs do have the talent. Like, they should be able to beat the Knicks in a 7-game series because they have a really talented team. They also have multiple bigs that they can put out there. They have size. They have a guy in Mitchell who can be the best player in a series. They have Garland, who can also be an additional offensive threat with all their other young players as well. So, I mean, We haven't seen all these teams take shape yet because it's just preseason. But like I said, I'm already excited about what we're looking towards in the NBA season. I mean, we've talked about some of these teams in the past and, some of the teams to look out for. So we don't necessarily have to reiterate it, but just so much talent across the league. And I do kind of wonder, just, I just do kind of wonder, like, if something doesn't go the way that we expect it to, say something doesn't go right in, Milwaukee, right, or something like that, right? What happens? Like I said, I expect Giannis to be on the Bucks, but I mean, this season at least. But I mean, people have kind of brought up some of the interviews and whatnot, but it's you just never know, right? But like maybe the Bucks, who knows? Maybe things go crazy and maybe they do make a run. Wouldn't expect it, but there is a lot riding on some of these teams this season, right? I mean, do we want to mention Lakers Suns at all, or do we just kind of not really talk about it a ton just because of all the guys missing?
I mean, yeah,
What do you think?
I mean, like you said, LeBron was out, Luca was out. I think because of rest or whatever. So typical preseason, activities, right? Where guys are out. So I mean, not a whole lot of takeaways in my opinion for me, but I mean, we can lightly graze over it if you would like to.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think of Phoenix?
I mean, it's preseason. I mean,
Yeah.
cool. I mean, like we got to see, we got to see, Dylan Brooks and what he would look like paired with Devin Booker and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The young guys, they look solid. I think defensively at least, right? But keep in
Yeah, I
mind
guess
it's the Lakers that aren't at full strength. So
right. Yeah, and Jalen Green didn't play, so we didn't see him.
exactly.
But yeah, so like that, and that's the problem with preseason is like for the Lakers, we're probably not going to see LeBron play at all in the preseason,
Oh,
right? Like I think there's a kind of an expectation that they think that he'll probably they'll just be cautious with his approach and he may not even play until like opening night, right?
yeah,
Which, can kind of change some of the things that you can do in preseason just because what he can do on both ends of the floor is a lot different than some of these other guys, right? But it's just a lot of these guys are a product of playing off of LeBron and Luca, right? Like say even a guy like a DeAndre Ayton,
yeah,
right? He had 1 point in the game and only 2 shot attempts, but that will probably go up with LeBron and Luca out there because then there's more guys that can get him the ball, more guys where you actually have to pay attention and put bodies on the other guys defensively, right? Like you don't have to commit bodies defensively to like a Jared Vanderbilt or like a Jake LaRavia. Like say like a LaRavia can shoot, but he's not a guy that you're going to send up multiple defenders at, right? Because
yeah,
he's primarily a stationary shooter. Whereas when you have LeBron and Luca both out there with Austin, right, then that's a different ball game altogether. And I think that's what you're hoping for. I mean, he still looked big, still grabbed rebounds, blocked a couple of shots, but it's just hard to really have any serious takeaways from that. It's kind of like say, New Orleans, right, played a preseason game. They're playing against an Australian team. I mean, Murphy and Zion led the team in points, but how many realistic takeaways can you really have with that, right? So
yeah. I mean, like you saw Poole and what he would look like. I mean, kind of a typical Poole game where the inefficiencies may be a glaring issue, but obviously had some timely buckets. So I mean, like yeah. I mean, New Orleans is a tough team to talk about because I think you and I both are just like, oh, what is this roster? But yeah, I mean, you also had Jeremiah Fears. I mean, I think take it with a grain of salt.
3 for 15, Jeremiah Fears.
But it is kind of rearing its ugly head where there are things that I think we talked about this team in our offseason breakdown and what we saw in the summer league that we didn't like, and you're seeing it now, right? And granted, this is against Melbourne United or whatever. So what do they look like against some real NBA action? I don't think it's going to be good.
I forgot that Sadiq Bey was on the team,
Yeah,
honestly.
yeah,
Because I
and
have
he's
not
coming
seen
off
him
of
play.
an ACL
Yeah,
tear.
ACL,
Yeah,
yeah, because I knew he was in the Pool trade. I just had not seen him in so
yeah,
long.
yep.
Where it's like, oh wow, this guy. I remember him. I think the first year we did the podcast, didn't he have like a crazy 50-point game or
Yes, he
whatever?
did. Yeah, and then he
Yeah.
ended up on
So
the Wizards. So it's like
yeah,
wild.
right. And it was kind of funny in this game, and I don't know if this will be the starting 5, but they actually started Kevon Looney
Yeah,
right next to Zion, right? Which, is a little bit different than, some of the other bigs, right? Derek Queen, who's the guy that they traded up for in the draft and gave away their first round pick for, he's hurt. So he's not going to be playing. And then Misi is the guy they drafted last year. But I do kind of wonder who wins the starting center battle between Looney and Misi, right? Because Looney's the veteran, and he's the guy that's been on all these, championship warrior teams, and he's an experienced guy in terms of the dribble handoffs and offensive rebounding, and he's a, physical screen setter and a good defender positionally. But, Misi is the young guy where you feel like he's got more upside, as an energy guy, shot blocker, lob threat, right? It's a different kind of look, right? Because like Looney's the physical guy, Misi's the athletic big. Then I guess Queen's the downhill offensive minded guy, but we haven't seen him play. We won't see him play at least for a little bit. But I mean, starting five for the Pelicans. What do we think? I mean, I guess we should mention the starting fives for some of these groups, like in terms of what we think. But for New Orleans, right? Like, I know we talked about their offseason, but obviously with DeJounte Murray out, he won't be back for a while. He would be probably penciled in if he was healthy, but he won't be there. Herb Jones, I would assume, would also be there too if he's healthy. I mean, I'm assuming he's still recovering from his shoulder surgery or injury that he had. I don't know. I don't know if he'll be ready on opening night. If he is, you'd think he'd be in there as a starter. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, right, like they're not going to be at full strength, so probably JP at the 1, Trey Murphy at the 2. The 3 is where things I guess get a little tricky.
Jones, he's probably in
there. Yeah. If Herb Jones is going to be ready to go by tip off, then yeah, I would go with him, and then probably Zion and Looney. I mean, like, and honestly, if Derek Queen was healthy, I'd argue start that guy. But I mean, Looney's the vet. He's a good physical big man, so. And I think that's something that they need. I mean, and Misi's not even that bad. Like, he's actually underrated, I think.
Really good. He had a great rookie campaign.
Yeah.
And that was a guy where we didn't actually expect him to be NBA ready as a rookie. And
right.
he actually was.
Yeah, so shout out to him. But, maybe that changes, throughout training camp and stuff, right? See who wins the starting battle. But, I mean, who knows? Yeah. It's kind of up for grabs, I would say. I don't think it's locked in at this point.
Right. And then say for, I mean, I guess for Phoenix, we kind of know probably like some combo of like Booker, Green, Brooks, Mark Williams, and then Ryan Dunn, Grayson Allen.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, so that's not going to be fun. I feel bad for Suns fans, man. Shout out to the Suns. Jeez.
Yeah, and then for the Lakers, I know we've talked about pretty much either Smart or Rui, but Smart right now I don't think is ready, right? Because he's got the foot thing or whatever. Yeah. So it's probably going to be Rui. Maxi Kleba, right? After saying he was fully healthy, he hurt his calf. He had an MRI. Apparently, it came back clean. So it seems like it's probably like a relatively minor injury. So I guess, good for him. Now we're kind of wondering, hey, is he going to be a backup stretch big option for them? We'll see. But I mean, is there anything really that you're kind of interested in looking at preseason in terms of like anything that you're actually kind of like looking forward to see?
I would be cliche and talk about the rookies, right? I think the VJ Edgecombe debut of preseason kind of got me hyped about the rest of the class, right? Specifically the guys taken ahead, and obviously the guys taken behind as well, right? Like I'm kind of looking at that top 10, honestly, the whole lottery, right? And other guys, littered here and there. But I really want to see, what Dylan Harper looks like, right? I want to see what Cooper Flagg looks like. Other guys as well, right? We got to look at Jeremiah Fears, and not super impressed with that one. But, I would say the rookies are probably top tier for me, because that's the one thing. The other stuff I can't really take seriously, right? Because I already know it might not even really have an everlasting impact on, the regular season. Whereas, I do want to see the rookies get their feet wet. It's the equivalent of a summer league, part 2.
And that's a good point where, there will be plenty of other rookies to look at. I guess you could also even mention maybe some of these second-year guys, right? Like, so let's say, for the Spurs, we know that they're probably going to already be without De'Aaron Fox and Dylan Harper to go into the season. right? But what about year two, Stephon Castle, right? What does he look like, right? Has he made any progress in terms of like being an
Yeah,
outside
great
shooter,
point. Yeah,
right? If we continue to work on things like handle and playmaking and everything else. If you look at Minnesota, that's another one, right? Because they literally were, well, I don't know if they wanted to, right? But they basically said goodbye to Nikhil Alexander Walker, right? And they have the intention of bringing it, having Terrence Shannon Jr. probably take a lot of his minutes, but then Rob Dillingham, right? Like he needs to be a good rotational piece, right?
yeah,
Because he was drafted in the top 10 in the draft last year, and he really wasn't a factor in their rotation at all, aside
mm-mm.
from when guys got hurt,
Mm-hmm.
right? And in this year, in year two, he needs to be, I'd say, like a 20-minute per game at least guy, right? Because, I mean, you look at the point guard spot, it's Mike Conley, and that's pretty much it, right? I
Yeah,
mean, I know Ant made progressions and strides as a ball handler and a playmaker and passer, right? But we've already seen like the problem against Oklahoma City was pretty much Ant and Randall that are the only guys that can dribble the ball. And once Randall got shut out, it was Ant really couldn't do as much. Like you have to have somebody who can kind of, I guess, reliably do something from the point guard spot, right? And I think the thing with Dillingham, right, is he's also looked at as a scorer, right? And he can kind of give them some extra juice with the ball in his hands because you need another ball handler playmaker because they don't match up well against Oklahoma City without him. And that's kind of a scary proposition where you're kind of hoping and praying that a guy like Dillingham could be one of your keys to taking out Oklahoma City, but it is something where that's going to have to happen if they're going to take the next step because you just look at him and you look at his offensive talent and the fact that he was drafted in the lottery and he's got to be he's got to be playable because we know defensively that there's going to be issues, but you're hoping on the fact that he's going to be flanked by guys like McDaniels, guys like Gobert. They're going to have more switchable lineups and different looks, right? Because I think the coach uh, mentioned right that we want to try to be able to have lineups where we can defend without Gobert, right? Because it seems like when he's not on the floor, their defense drops off a cliff, right? They can maybe score, maybe at a better rate, but on the defensive end and rebounding wise, it doesn't work as well, right? Because he's their best rebounding defensive big. So, that's a guy where I'm kind of looking at him to potentially, hopefully, take the next step as well, right? Because that's a guy that's on an actual contender.
yeah, I would agree with you on that. Yeah, the second year guys, and guys who have something to prove, right? Whereas they didn't necessarily have a great role last year, or they had a great year last year, and we kind of want to see more, right? And they've kind of established and set that bar of oh yeah, I'm way better than where I was picked. You know what I mean? So I am curious about that too, right? And that's going to be awesome, right? Like I love the progression. That's something that I always loved, about the NBA is seeing, guys coming from their rookie year to second year, and taking that leap forward that, could have been expected or unexpected, right? And that's the magic of the league. So love to see it.
Right. Yeah. Year one, Nikola Topic for Oklahoma City. See what he's got. He could be he could be a guy that could play some minutes for them as the backup guard. It's going to be important, right? Because
Yeah.
it's kind of wild, right? Because I think I had read that Oklahoma City now is 3 straight years in where their first round pick got hurt and missed their rookie year, right?
Good
Because
point.
Chet Holmgren missed his rookie season, Popich missed his rookie season, Sorba unfortunately is going to miss
Yeah.
his rookie season. That's a guy where that kind of sucks because he's a guy where probably wouldn't play as much, but he would be another big you could put out there, right? Where it's like, okay, we know that the front court guys might miss some time because they did last year. So that's another guy you could put out there. So you don't have to play small and
Yeah.
have Jalen Williams always play center for the most part. So uh we'll see. So moving on around the league, we did have a few other things happen, right? Not like a crazy amount, but we did have, say, Nikola Jovic, right? Sign his contract extension, 4 years, 62 million with the Miami Heat, right? So he's now on the books for a while. We're still waiting on Tyler Hero, right? I don't think he's definitely not signed an extension yet, right? And his extension would obviously be a lot different than Jovic's, right? Because he's gonna have his would be way more money, right? I think his would be what, like basically 40 million a year. So I don't know if Miami's gonna do that. I mean, because the Jovic one, that contract is pretty inexpensive, right? Relative to most of these other extensions, right? And he's a decent player, right? He's a young guy who's improved every year. Who knows? Maybe they ditch the two big starting five and maybe they put Jovic back in there. But now you just kind of wonder what happens with Hero because now he's hurt, and that kind of changes Miami's beginning part of the season because now you're going to be without Hero, and he's your best offensive player. You did bring in Norman Powell, but I mean, the problem was with Hero and Bam last year, right? The offense was not very good, right? And you're kind of hoping that you bring in Norman Powell, and you basically brought him in for nothing, right? That you can hopefully take a leap offensively with that team and then maybe move into that play-in territory, playoff territory. But you're going to be without Hero at least for a little bit, right? Because he had the ankle surgery thing, and I'm do kind of wondering, like, do you think he'll get that extension? And what do you
Yeah.
think about the Jokic extension first? I guess.
Yeah, the Jovic one is fine, right? Like I think he's a serviceable wing, right? And he brings a lot, on both ends of the floor for that team, and I think he fits the identity, right? And yeah, he's just I think it's a well-deserved, extension. No complaints from me. As for Hero though, that's the tough one because I think offensively we know that the guy's special. I really enjoyed watching him last year. I know, a lot of Heat fans are just like, oh, what a horrible year it was. But that silver lining of, seeing, Hero kind of not necessarily maxing out his potential, but getting closer to, I think, what.
An all-star.
Exactly. Being an all-star and getting closer to what, kind of was expected of him, after such a great rookie year. That was really special. But that era might be coming to an end, and that's why I was saying like they're kind of one elite guy away from being right back in the swing of things in terms of the Eastern Conference, especially since there's such a big power vacuum and nobody's kind of just sitting at top. So they could challenge for it, I think, if they ended up making another move, but the problem is the superstar market is kind of just dead right now. So I don't really know where they go from there. But in terms of handling, Hero and his extension, I don't know what that looks like because, I mean, to be honest, his game has flaws. That's the problem, right? And everybody's game has flaws, but his are a little bit more noticeable, especially when, defensively he's not, top tier at all, but he doesn't carry, the load of, say like a Jalen Brunson or something like that, right? So that kind of archetype of player, I feel like is slowly but surely on its way out. So I feel like he might need to diversify his game, but it might be a little bit too late for that. I don't know.
He improved on the ball, right, as a playmaker.
Absolutely.
He improved as a finisher around the basket, right? So he's got the floater game. But the problem is we know he can't be a number one offensive option on a really good team. Like that's
Right.
just not going to work, right? But if he's gonna get the full extension, the full max extension, he's basically going to be paid like a number one option, and that's kind of the issue there. Like you mentioned, like a Jalen Brunson, you're perfectly fine paying him a max too. Actually, he took less money, right? The last time he signed his extension, right? But you're not quite as comfortable giving that to Hero. And like you said, the Heat are in a different phase, like unlike the Knicks, right? Because we know that the Knicks, like you said, there's no team that's OKC in the Eastern Conference, but the Knicks are looking at themselves as we can make the finals, right? And it doesn't have to be a scenario where literally everything has to go right for us to even have a chance. Like they could just be that good in the Eastern Conference and make the finals, right? The Heat, like you said, need a little bit more, and they don't have a guy where you can say, yeah, this guy can easily be the best player on our team and can get us, through multiple series, right? Like that guy was Jimmy Butler. They don't have him anymore, right? Instead, it's Andrew Wiggins and Norman Powell and Davion Mitchell, right? That's a different look. That's a different type of group there. And that's kind of where I think the article mentioned in Clutch Points, where it was more so like if Bam were to request a trade from Miami, right? Like they'd be like the Warriors would be monitoring that situation. I mean, I don't know what the Heat will do, without Hero. I mean, I would assume they wouldn't be as good, right? But it's just a matter of could he come back in time. But I think that's the part where the extension is tough. If they agree to it, it would have to probably be a little bit shorter term and probably less money
Yeah.
because I just feel like it's a hard task, I think, to get a team to be like, yeah, we want to pay that guy $40 million a year, right? Like it was different when he was on his rookie deal, but now that he's a max or close to max player that could potentially just make more, right? That's the tougher part. For a guy who is really good, like he's improved as a especially as an offensive player, but like you said, the flaws on the defensive end, he is one of the weaker defensive guards in the league where he's going to get targeted, and he's not a guy who's a lock to give you 25 plus even in the playoffs, right? Because we know in the regular season, he's been really good the last few seasons, right? Where he's been a 20-point per game guy, but in the playoffs, right, his numbers have taken a nosedive on the offensive end, and that's where pretty much all of his value comes from, right? He doesn't give you much value on the defensive end. So that's where it's like, yeah, like he could continue to improve as a player, but I don't see his ceiling as like a top 20 player in the league or 30 player in the league, because it feels like you have to be somewhere in that realm to feel comfortable with giving a guy like, say, like a Pascal Siakam, right? Like, say if you look at 2K, right, like their overalls are probably not much different,
Sure.
right? But I think a lot of teams would be more comfortable paying a guy like Siakam the money that he's getting than, say, like a Tyler Hero. Even though, like, if you look at Siakam's contract, right, he's certainly not an inexpensive player, right? You know, he's definitely a guy on a pretty big contract, right? Like this season, Siakam's going to be making 45 million and then 48 million, then 52 million, and he's 31. But he's a lot more versatile on both ends of the floor, and I think that's kind of and it's different. He's not a guard, right? But still, just as a whole, I think you're right where it's like, yeah, the combo guard, that's kind of really geared towards offense. It's tough. And like I said, he's a good passer playmaker. It's not like he's just a guy that only chucks up shots and never passes the ball. He averages 5 assists a game, but he's still not a point guard. He's at best a combo guard, right? And he's good. It's just I don't know if Miami's gonna do that. I mean, they don't have to do it now, anyways. It could just be later. But I don't know if I can't guarantee it like the way that you could with previous CBAs, right? Like in the previous CBA, it would probably be guaranteed. And then like the Kuminga one, right? Where it's just like you sign it, then you ask questions later. And it's like, we'll figure it out later. If we have to trade him when the day comes, we'll do it, but we don't have to do that right now. But now it's pretty clear, like teams, if they're like, if we don't believe in you necessarily, we're either not giving you an extension, or if we do, it won't be that long. Already mentioned that with Jalen Green, right? Like they gave him that contract to be traded. Lo and behold, the moment they could trade him, what did they do? They traded him. So
Yeah, offer it. Yeah.
exactly. So we'll see what happens there, and we'll continue to monitor it, right? Because they are in the East. So if he comes back and is relatively like himself, and Norman Powell's working out, and the offense is humming, and they look decent, they look like they could make the playoffs, maybe they do something, but I don't know. I mean, do I expect the Heat to be able to bring in guys at this stage of the game?
Nope.
Like, it's kind of hard to really, say that now at this point.
Yeah.
Like Miami may just be, the front office may be a little bit washed at this point, but
Yeah, that ain't the word, man.
yeah,
Wow.
you never know. Yeah, so we'll see. Also, we got some news coming out of Dallas, right? I think a couple days ago, right, where it was Daniel Gafford in camp. He rolled his ankle, so he's going to be out 2 to 3 weeks. So you're already down Kyrie. Okay, obviously Gafford's not their second best player, right? There's a drop off, but just in terms of like, now you're down one of your bigs.
Yeah.
So now you're kind of down to AD and Lively, which is still a really tall, big front court. I mean, I think they said Lively's grown a couple inches, so he might be
7'3".
like 7'3"
Yeah.
now at this point, which is wild.
Yeah.
But that is going to be one of the issues and questions with the Mavs, right? Is it's just hard to trust them from a physical standpoint, because they do have a lot of guys where they're probably going to miss time. Gafford missed time last year, right, with the Mavs, right? Where, I mean, everybody for the Mavs was hurt last year. And so maybe that's not necessarily fair. But it just kind of sucks that we're 1 day or so into preseason, but we've already been talking about injuries for the last week or so, right? Because starting with that Van Vliet one, which was a torn ACL, so that's one of the worst case scenarios because that's a season ender. But we're already talking about ones where, like, yeah, we may not even see some of these guys, like, the first week or two, maybe month of the season.
Yeah.
So, it's not, I mean, does this kill the Mavs season? No, because they still have a bunch of other front court guys. They still have plenty of help in the front court to be able to get it done. It's just always rough when you start losing one or two guys, because then it's like, okay, that puts more strain and more pressure on these other guys. And then what happens to them if they get overtaxed and then they get hurt? I know AD, he came into the camp listed at 268, right? And I think I'm going to assume that's because he was rehabbing with his eye, right? So he probably couldn't do quite as much. He's already said he's lost 5 pounds coming into camp. And it's interesting, right? Because he's supposedly going to play a lot more right? With the bigs that they have. Obviously, Gafford's going to be out for a couple weeks, but I do wonder what that looks like, right? Because, I've seen him as a Laker fan, right? Where usually he would kind of come in to the season a little bit bigger, right? And then he would eventually like play his way down. And I'm not saying like he only plays his way into shape. I just mean, usually he would look a little bit different from the beginning of the season onwards, except for last season, right? He was on fire early in the season, right? Where he was leading the league in scoring. But outside of that, usually he'd start off a little bit slow and then pick it up. But the Mavs are still a very intriguing team, right? Because there's such a huge gap in terms of how people feel about them at their highest versus like the people who are lowest on them feel, right? Which can't say that about every team, right?
Yeah.
Like say for like Oklahoma City or Denver, right? Like maybe people feel like a team like Denver might be overhyped, but just the gap is not really the same, right? Because there's nobody who thinks like, Denver could be either really good or really bad, right? Whereas in the case of the Mavs, it feels like there are people who feel like they could be really good and then people who feel like they're going to just suck.
Yeah. It is a odd team because I think, the addition of Cooper Flag is probably, what a lot of people are kind of, honing in on. But then we're on the side of like, we've kind of seen something like this before. We know not to put immense pressure, on a rookie like that. And there's going to be growing pains alongside the fact that this team can't necessarily, break that injury bug, consistently. So, yeah, I think I can understand both sides for sure.
Exactly. So we'll see what happens with them. But, as you know, I'm a little bit lower on them mainly just because of the offensive woes, right? But
Absolutely.
obviously the injuries don't necessarily help.
Yeah, absolutely.
So is there anything else you're kind of looking at as we get really close into this, as we get closer and closer towards the beginning of the season? We'll probably not yet. We'll probably pretty soon start doing our predictions for awards and whatnot. But anything else you're kind of looking forward to?
I mean, just, dipping our toes back into the NBA action, right? We already talked about it. Like, Summer League is, the little bit of a taste that we get with the rookies and, guys who have a lot to prove, yada, 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 right? But then preseason is where, you start to see guys, ramping up back to, game speed and stuff like that. So, it's just a little taste, and I think it feels good to be, somewhat back for sure, right? Especially, considering the offseason that we had. It is kind of concerning that there are so many injuries, right, throughout the offseason and up till now, right? We're still getting, more and more notifications and stuff. But I think it's going to be a fun season, and, hopefully preseason will slightly reflect that. Like I said, the Edgecombe debut already has me hyped for the season. So,
Yeah, so exactly. I would agree with that. So, now I guess we'll close it out like we normally do, right? Where we look at, these polls from the post that we usually make on our IG, right? And our last one was tied to the Horford situation, right? Where we asked the question of will the Warriors win another championship? Uh 80% said no, 20% said yes. So it seems like most people are kind of in the line of even if you like the Horford edition, which I think we both do,
yeah.
we still feel it's probably unlikely that the Warriors will win another championship. And that's not a bad thing. Like it's like there's no knocks, right, against the Warriors anymore if they don't win because they've
Yeah.
already won as much as anybody at this point, right? So nobody's, no serious person, right, should be clowning them if they don't win again. Because it's like, I mean, hey, this is kind of what's going to happen anyways. And the main thing is like, can they at least continue to be competitive? We want to at least see them have a chance, right, to contend at this point, right? You don't want to see an scenario where they're just on kind of like a middling team and they just kind of fade out,
Right.
right? We want to see them continue to compete and have a chance to win. And you just never know, right? Things maybe line up, maybe things go your way, and who knows?
Yeah, I think they're going to be a competitive team throughout the regular season. It's just come postseason, what do they look like, bro? Like, health wise, are they going to be okay? Is it even going to be the same kind of roster construction? Who knows? But I don't think championship is in there is realistic for them. And like you said, it's not a bad thing at all because they're a great team and they're going to be good on both ends of the floor. And another Steph year is just going to be amazing. So
Yeah. Who do you think should start at the two guard spot? Because it seems like the four starters, Steph, Jimmy, Draymond, Horford are locked in.
Yeah. Maybe Pods. Maybe
Yeah,
maybe
probably
Moody.
probably a question better served earlier in the podcast, but still.
Yeah, maybe Moody, maybe Pods. I don't know. I'm not high on those guys. You already know how I felt about them, via the the Rockets series from last year. But yeah, I don't know. Melton's not going to be healthy by the time the season starts. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think probably the guy that I think if he gets fully healthy, that they would probably
Oh
like
yeah, yeah,
to start because of the fit
yeah,
on both ends of the floor. It's just a matter of he's been so banged up the last couple of years where they're gonna have to basically kind of do like what they did with Otto Porter Jr.
yeah,
and just
exactly.
kind of pray that he's healthy,
Yeah,
which Otto Porter Jr. was, and then wasn't healthy after that. Wasn't really healthy too much before that.
right.
Yeah, so either way, right, that pretty much ends today's episode. If you want to join in on our polls, you can always join at the OBT podcast, right? And if you want to leave a comment on any of our videos or posts at the OBT podcast as well on our channel, we'll try to read them at the end of the episode and continue to like and subscribe because the NBA season's almost here. We're in preseason and we're only weeks away from the beginning of the season where we'll have real basketball that will count and that will matter, that we'll be able to talk about as all those teams try to contend for the championship. So we appreciate all the support. See you next episode.